lovers. So today we're doing a tasting, and normally I would give a little bit of a preamble about the distillery. However, this one is a relatively young distillery. There's not much background information on it, so I thought we'd just start with a little bit of the history of Australian whiskies. So Australia has had a long history of whisky production dating back to 1820, but most distilleries in Australia, except for ones in Victoria, shifted their own production throughout various parts of the 19th century. But for the most part, Australian whisky, particularly in Victoria, has gone through three eras. The first era was the colonial malt whisky production era. This is between 1863 and 1929. In 1862, the Victorian Distillation Act was passed, and our first large-scale whisky production began in 1863 with the John Dunn's Warrenhip Distillery opening outside of Ballarat. This was soon followed by the Federal Distillery in Port Melbourne, opening in 1888. And distilleries didn't just produce whiskies, they produced all sorts of spirits. They made brandy, gin, probably rum, and standard colonial era malt production. The second era was the blended whisky period, and this was set between 1930 to 1980. In the 1930s, the Distillery Company of Edinburgh, known today as Diageo, opened the Corio Distillery outside of Geelong. Corio supplanted Warrenhip as the largest producer in Australia, and shortly afterwards merged with the Federal Distilleries. After World War II, Gibleys of London, at the time the second biggest distiller in the world, opened a distillery in Melbourne and acquired the Millian Distillery in Adelaide. This meant that the two international companies controlled the majority of whisky production within Australia. And because of protectionist tariffs, these companies decided to control the cheap whisky market, resulting in poor quality whisky and damaged Australia's reputation as a whisky product. But in the 60s, the tariffs on imported whisky was lifted and Australia had access to affordable good whisky. This led to a significant drop in the demand for cheap, nasty whisky, and by the 1980s, these major distillers had been shut down and sold. And now, the third era, the one we're currently in, is the boutique era. This began in the early 90s with several small craft distilleries opening. This began in 1992 in Tasmania with the Lark Distillery. Bill Lark had to lobby the government to change the Distillation Act of 1901, which favoured large commercial production of whiskies by restricting licences to distillers with a primary wash no smaller than 2,700 litres. Now, by comparison, since these laws have changed, today our current largest independent distillers use a 1,800 wash. So, thanks to Bill Lark, we now have 293 distilleries in Australia with about, I think, 50 to 60 products out there on the market. Now, one of those distillers is Starward. This was established in 2004 under the name of New World Whisky Distillery and started in an old Qantas Airlines hangar in Melbourne, Victoria. Starward is known for using red wine casks for all its maturation, with the barrels coming exclusively from the Barossa Valley. So today we're going to try the Starward Twofold. So called because it's double grain. Now, yes, that's right, a double grain, not a single malt. Yeah, I know this is breaking my only drink single malt, but I have a couple of loopholes I'm going to use to justify it. First of all, I didn't actually buy this Melody. This is technically actually her whiskey. But she bought it for us to share, and I always believe I'm very grateful for anything we receive as a gift, so I would not ever turn anything down. Second, I'm actually not opposed to blended whiskies. As I pointed out in a previous video, mostly single malts are all technically blended, since to be a single malt, it only has to be made of malted barley matured in that distillery. Third, the boutique era has resulted in excellent whiskies that have high demand across the entire world. But since these are all small boutique distilleries, there is no large-scale production, so there's a high demand, low supplies, and it's really hard to get your hands on good Australian whiskey. So, those are my loopholes. You have a problem with it? Well, I don't care. So let's get started. Alright, we're in. Okay, so we have a golden coloured whiskey, a tint of red fruit. The tint of red would be obviously from the red wine barrels. Okay, a very fruity smell. Plum, ripened bananas, possibly caramelized date. Okay, so as a blended whiskey, this is actually a lot smoother than you probably find in a single malt. It definitely has a vanilla-y taste to it, with the hint of plum and various other stone fruits. A peppery, sugary aftertaste is lingering there on my tongue. So, yeah, this is the Starward Twofold, a local whiskey. Not a single malt, but I would still recommend it. You can get this. I think Mel got this at Cobble's Liquorland. It's not a. It's quite an affordable whiskey. But yeah. So until next time, Sontag.